welcome back to Educational Triage. This is Tony, and I am, of course, joined with the ever-knowing Philip.
Aloha.
Hey, Philip. Hey.
Ever-knowing Philip. Sounds like a great band name. Ever-knowing Philip.
It does. So this week we are talking about critical race theory, which is probably, not probably, it really is a huge topic. And it's very misunderstood. People don't know what the heck it is. People like to talk about it, but they don't really know what it is. Is that correct?
That's really correct, because it's not what they think it is. Yeah.
Okay. So before we tuck in, why don't you give the audience, our listeners and our viewers on YouTube, why don't you tell them what gives you the right to talk about critical race theory before we begin?
I hate that word. I have a right to that. I don't have a right, but I have some experience. I have a Black Studies and History degree from Portland State University. And so I studied history also with an accent on African history and West Asian, Middle Eastern, what's known as Middle Eastern in other terms, history. So I've studied it myself. I studied it in the grad stuff, CRT, and I also studied sociology as an undergrad. I was kind of well-rounded because I was certified social studies. So it's odd to think about, but for me, it was like, wow, sort of specific and boring in a way, because it's based in conflict theory from sociology. And it kind of comes from, that's how I was introduced to it. There's three ways that sociology.
What's conflict theory?
Right. Three things that sociology is kind of looking at the world at, and it's the structural functional approach. You know, what do we do as a society? Sociology is to humans what psychology is to one human. You know, how do we do things in a society?
Okay.
So the first way would be structural functional, and how we operate, how do we do our stuff? How do we, how do we set up bureaucracies? How do we do that? That sort of thing. And the second would be a symbolic interactional approach. And that's sort of more present day. Like right now, why is our society divided would be a great sociological question under the symbolic interaction. And the third would be the conflict approach. And that's the orientation that considers a macro level, an overall level, that there's an unequal distribution of desired resources sort of thing. And, why does that happen? How does that happen? And that the proponents of that and where it came from was W.E.B. Du Bois and C. Wright Mills, but also Karl Marx.
Right.
And so
that's a loaded name.
Yeah. So when you say Karl Marx, it's like only in the facts, they're only in the relationship that Karl Marx had to conflict and conflict theory, and how societies will conflict with each other and such. So when you're studying it, that's where CRT came from. It originally came from that approach of studying. It actually came, and I'll have to think about this, from the law. They were studying the law because it really applied to how the law was unequally applied, honestly.
So
it's really relevant to that. And then sociology. Yeah.
So critical legal studies.
Critical legal studies, that's what it was. Yeah. And that was the same group that came up with, later critical race theory. And that was Derek Bell and Richard Delgado. There's some other names in there. They did a lot of work in that.
Kimberly Crenshaw.
Yep.
Okay.
And so that was, there was sort of it was a range of essays put out in the 80s, I believe, originally. And they just talked about the conflict and how it has it kind of sprang into a life of its own, because it talked about racism. It had some proponents that were interesting. The first thing is racism is not an aberration. It's not like, that was then and this is now, or gosh, they were different then, or that was our history. It's not an aberration. It's there. And secondly, it serves an important purpose. And whatever that purpose may be, it's so important, in fact, that it has to be, manifested as laws, and it has to be enforced as laws. And that's based on race, and race is completely socially constructed.
Okay.
So there's three steps to it. It would say that first, racism is not. It's kind of like accepting that racism is there. It's not some blip on the radar screen. We're in a racist society, and
Okay.
that it serves an important purpose to what we don't know. It becomes kind of plain to see sometimes if you look closely, and that color or race is just invented by the human context. It's just it's invented and it's kept alive subconsciously by the society itself. It invents, manipulates, or retires it when convenient, but it does manifest that. So society is
So,
in charge of what race is. It could not see race very
okay,
easily.
you have completely lost me.
Okay, let's put it this way. It's a laser beam kind of focus, critical race theory on critical
Right.
or conflict, and
Okay.
then race theory in society, saying that the proponent is we do live in a racist society,
Okay.
that it manifests itself for a purpose, and then that's based on race or perceived race, and it's kept alive or reduced as it may be by the overall society. It's manipulated by the society as a whole, and that's
So
just
the
what it
predominant
does.
so
Yeah,
so the predominant culture
yeah,
is what governs the racism.
exactly, and it does so for those purposes that it deems necessary. And
Okay. And
so
what would
right now, I
those
would say that people are using race to scare basically the predominant cultures. They're saying the race is coming. People of color will outnumber people that aren't of color, white people, by the
Mhm.
year 2038. Say
This is
that's
the replacement theory, correct?
is that replacement theory? I mean, if that's what it's
That's my
based on,
understanding.
that's
If I'm
reality.
wrong, somebody please correct me.
Yeah, that would be reality. I mean, if you look at it, this nation has been attracting immigrants since
Hmm.
forever, and the first immigrants were the Brits and the other
Well,
that
it wasn't
came
just
from
the
across.
Brits; it was the Huguenots. It was
Yeah, it's a
the
big place.
Germans. Yeah.
Exactly. So to say that's kind of absurd. Of course, people of color, if you're looking at color, excuse me. So if you think color is substantial, color differences can be dangerous, and you accent that, and then you think about things like, and eventually people of color will outnumber white people, that can scare you, when in fact that's an eventuality. It's not a bad thing. It's the way things are. It's the way America is constructed. So
But but
yeah.
worldwide, the
Mhm.
white race is outnumbered anyway.
Exactly. So you're hunkering down and manning the battle stations when in fact there's no fight, but you're going to make a fight that way by basing it on that color. You would
Right.
say that. And if you
Okay.
notice, like Black Lives Matter, it really embraced us. Everyone sort of embraced it. Remember, corporations embraced it,
Hmm.
and they started getting along with that one. And don't think they did that because they're wonderful humans. They did it because there's a profit to be
They
made.
well, exactly.
And so they all of a sudden going, yay, we're for social justice because now it pays. That would be a condition that
Hmm.
critical race theory would look at. And it's kind of like it's the messenger. It's interesting. If you think about it, I looked at it. I try to look at things to understand them. Why do we do these things? And that was focused on that conflict. But it's kind of like you become so unconscious of it all. It's like the fish that are swimming along, and one fish turns to the other and says, the water's cold today, and the other fish says, what's water? It's like you just don't know that
Hmm.
you're basing things on race. Like I said, when you group people, you meet them and go, hi, my name's so and so. What do you do? That's as a profession. That's a way of grouping an individual. We just do it subconsciously, kind of like, okay, how do I deal with it? Oh, they're a professional, they're a laborer, they're this. We just kind of do that. We don't think about it.
How different, let me ask you this. Does critical race theory translate into other cultures? For example,
Mm.
if you were to go to China, if you were to go to
Yeah.
Japan,
You mean non-homogeneous? Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
Would critical race theory stand?
Well, critical race theory just looks at this incredible conflict that you have,
Well,
and how, and
that's
the origins and what it is, and it just
right. But where? Where?
anywhere.
That's
I mean, I don't know
so
the
it would
history.
work in
Well, I
China.
do
It
know.
would work.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, Jamaica had a really stratified, interesting system because we have a very separated system because slaves were kept separate from whites,
Right.
period. I mean, they didn't get to do
Hmm.
any of the stuff. They just weren't included in any of the social structure. So they developed a separate culture. In Jamaica, it sort of became tones of whiteness or blackness. So if you were a light skinned black, you were just naturally treated better. If you're dark skinned black, you were naturally treated worse. And they didn't
Well,
have a permanent form of slavery. They were actually freed, and I can't remember how long, but there was a certain time limit after which slaves could get their freedom in that place. And I'm
but
like,
that's culturally. I mean, if you go into South America, because I used to live down there,
yeah,
there is a caste system,
yeah,
and the lighter skinned you are, usually the easier it is for you to do anything.
mm-hmm.
But then as you get darker, it becomes tougher. And at the lower end of that are the black people. And
Yep.
so they are, what's really interesting is the country that I was living in, we had a black Nazi running for president,
Oh, jeez.
and he was
Okay.
one of the final candidates.
Black man.
So, you take a look at the art and you see, well,
Yeah.
the art there tends to be very surrealistic. Well, so is the life. But no, there is a caste system down there.
Yeah.
And so you
So
have
what
to
conflict
think,
theory would look at that, and I would say it's pretty universal. People
right.
stratify pretty quickly, pretty extensively. The whole Indian caste system. I don't know
Hmm.
very much about it, but I guess there are
Right.
quite the barriers between them.
Hmm.
And you know, it's in this nation, critical race theory just showed me, just in more academic terms, that we just have a different system. We have a racially discriminating system. It picks people out. White people do in fact get away with certain crimes, or they don't get looked at, or black people get looked at more in all these ways. The thing is, people think in those terms, and so they act in those terms.
Right. So,
Yeah.
okay. So let's go
And
back.
I wanted to add one more
Well,
thing too. Intersectionality is really really kind of does a number with critical race theory, because if you think
explain.
about it, there's one more thing that about critical race theory is that there's a sort of a cultural identity that
Hmm.
those black people, those people, those them white people, this those Asian people, it's
Those people, your people.
those
Yeah.
people, and they're all alike. And so one of my
So the
examples is
stereotypes.
After Martin Luther King died, everyone's kind of going, well, who's the next black leader? At least all the white people were. But the diverse black culture was going, what are you talking about? I mean, first, we're mourning, and second, we're so diverse, a bunch of people. Who's our next leader? Who's your next leader? So
Well, they're looking for the next Messiah, right?
yeah, well, everyone just kind of thinks that the black identity is so concrete that it needs another leader. Like Martin Luther
Hmm.
King seemed to be, yeah, kind of like the Messiah, at least to white people. He was much more palatable than Malcolm X, which said, no more. But, and in the end, I love Malcolm, because in the end he goes, yeah, hey, uncle, I was wrong. We are all like, it's bad, but I don't think the white man is the devil. He's actually making contrition, I would believe. Anyway, so it's sort of like when Martin Luther King died, white folks lost their way of dealing with black people. Well, that's the only thing I understood. And so there's that identity that's sort of like you're always part of that club if your skin is darker.
Hmm.
And intersectionality really messes with that. Because if you think about it, they're black
What
folks.
is
We're
what
all,
is intersectionality?
well, it's a prideful sort of,
If you had to
I
put it
would
into
say,
two sentences that were very clear and concise, what would you
terribly prideful defense of a specific identity, I would
Give me an
say.
example.
Whew, oh gosh. I'm probably going to make everybody mad. Here goes. Now, I could make up a hypothetical.
No, just
Like prideful. Oh, a person that's just so over the top, like Philadelphia, gonna rage at the football game kind of thing. I mean, I don't know if there's a group. How about soccer hooligans? You
okay.
know,
Soccer hooligans. How are they intersexual?
so if they want, if
Intersectionality.
intersectional, so if they went on a rampage saying, that this is us, we are an identity, we deserve, recognition, even though this is the basis of our behavior, this is how we interconnect. This is us, and we deserve rights because you know, that's, we just are a group, a conglomerate group, or an interest group, and we need to be, specifically kind of looked at, addressed to, and heard. And it's kind of like, yeah, but you're just kind of like, you're just soccer hooligans, or I
But
don't want to
what's
put
the
anybody
intersection?
down. Well, the intersection would be, you're right. It, Intersections have to have political power, I guess, what it would be already. And if you think about it, okay, I'm fessing up. I'm used to be Democrat. I vote independent, but I lean so heavily Democrat. But it's always the Democrats who can't seem to get it together, because the old phrase goes, Republicans get behind it, and Republicans fall in line and Democrats fall in love. Democrats don't get stuff done because they're kind of quibbling at, like, well, our group, this group, my district, this district, this minority, that minority. And it's like, you know what? There's a bigger plan, and quit quibbling and quit disagreeing over the finer things at the intersections, and come together. Like, you got a cake pan, don't cut the stuff before you bake it, or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to bake 12 separate brownies. You can bake the pan, and we can cut it in the
But I'm
interest
still
of
I'm
kind of.
still lost as to what intersectionality is.
It's when your interests just don't align with anyone else's.
So what
Although
does that
you would,
intersect with?
well, what I guess I'm saying is CRT. You're really fleshing this out. Thank you. CRT. The way you look at CRT is it would place an artificial intersection on Black people. It would, or interest group of Black people would cordon them off. Asian people are Asian people.
Okay, so you're talking
So
stereotypes then.
yeah, yeah. I guess
So you take a
stereotypes,
group of people and you
racial
stereotype
groups.
them, and that's one of the intersections, because that is one of the paths that you cross.
And they would
It,
fight amongst it. There would be, if you're
mhm.
trying to overcome it in society, it's sort of, like, for a long time women were working with men to get rid of slavery, to abolish slavery in the early 1800s.
Well,
It
actually,
never
women were
occurred to
the
them
one
that
were the
women were
force
treated
behind it.
worse. Yes. And that's the whole thing. It was like, they said, and when it was starting to roll, and they said, hey, gentlemen, how about, a little slice for us women? If you notice, there's a little bit of lack of rights here. And they're going, oh, what are you talking about? What's water? They were just confounded that these Sojourner Truth was actually, what are you talking? This is nonsense. Women don't have value. It's, what value do they have?
Well, actually, the political power of women in the 19th century was huge. Look at Harriet Beecher Stowe. What you
Yeah.
have to remember is that once she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which, have you read it?
So it's been a long
It's a
time.
wonderful soap opera. It's a wonderful soap
It's
opera.
a
I
serial kind
remember
of
being
thing.
in a
Yeah.
literature class and
Love it.
people were
Serial.
saying, "Oh, I cried. It was so sad." They said, what did you think?" And there were some people who said, "I just laughed through the entire book. I mean, it was
It's
so
accomplished.
over the top."
Crime and
But
Punishment was written that way, as a serial.
well,
That's why it's good.
the thing with this was that it really touched. It was part of sentimental literature, and
Yeah.
so the women, they read it, and then who cooked, who cleaned, who had the ear of their husbands, and who kind of ruled the household. And honey, this is what you're going to do if you want to be happy at home. And so women actually had a lot more clout than people give them credit for.
That's that sort of what critical race theory would say. When it's in the interest of everyone, it's sort of allowed to come forward.
Mm-hmm. But
And
see,
to,
that's what women did. I mean,
yeah,
that's how the abolitionist movement went. It was
yeah,
first begun by the women who then had the husbands under their thumb.
it's taken me a lifetime
But
to include women in history, but now I'm very fluent in everything I see. But for the longest period, I was almost brainwashed to think that aside from a few women, they always come up with Harriet Tubman. Women kind of aren't in history. And I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
that
they are.
can't be right. I was sort of crossed wires on that. That whole
There's
half of
tons
us
of
is
them.
just not doing nothing. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah, it's like
And
crazy.
I mean, there's the famous quote by Abraham Lincoln looking at Harriet Beecher Stowe saying, "So you're the little lady that started this mess, right?"
So
But
did he say that? Oh,
it was something
something
along
such.
those lines.
Oh my God! I wish I
But
knew that. I didn't know
but
that.
my big thing is that you had the North who was abolitionist and they were fighting against and they wanted to go against the South.
Mhm.
And the Civil War began for several reasons, several factors, not just slavery and
No,
abolishing it.
the Lincoln.
But
Yeah.
when the black population began to move north for the industry, for jobs, for a better way of life from the
Mm-hmm.
South, they were redlined. They were put into their place. They were not warmly welcomed because it became a question of NIMBY, NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Which was based on race,
Right.
which was a concept that was invented. I mean,
So, okay.
it's
So
hard to
let's,
explain to people that because when you're enslaving people on another continent and you're trying, apparently, if you're trying to rationalize this is how I think, but I don't think like a racist, so I don't know. But how it works is you have to like make that human something other than human. And if that human is dark skinned, all the better. Hey, they look much different.
well, if they're
That's
different than
these
you are,
people.
then they don't feel, they don't think, they don't eat, they can't.
Well, that's not even
If,
something that came into concept for the longest period of time. People were so intermingled. They stayed familial or perhaps religious communities, but generally speaking, if you were dark skinned or light skinned, you were many explorers, in the first 500 years of exploration were Africans. I mean, they just were on ships. They were dark skinned because they came from Africa.
right.
And so no one even thought about it really. And then
Well,
all of a sudden it becomes this, there's black and white. And it's like, that's not even a concept 500 years ago.
well, actually, it was because according to African myths, and
Oh,
if you
okay.
look at African myths, they will say that the people from the north were not baked long enough, and
Yeah.
the people from the south,
Yeah.
meaning the Africans, some of them were left to bake just a wee bit too long.
Let me specify. You're right. Economic separation.
Okay.
There was no significant economic principle that made color a viable concept. There were lots of cultures that say, we're
Mm.
darker, lighter than they are, we're better or worse. We're the only people on earth, and people tend to do that, but not from a macro view. See race for economic in a very deep economic, sociological, societal, sense.
But
Now it's a concept.
the idea of slavery and treating people as less than, I mean, if you look at Roman slaves, if you look at Greek slaves,
Yeah,
and there was a lot of intermingling because they are
yeah,
so close to the African continent. And
yeah,
and they did commingle a great
yeah. That
deal,
was a different form of slavery, though. This
but
was
it was still slavery. You
industrial
still,
slavery. This was
well,
literally industrial
it had
slavery.
more to do with
Really,
conquering. It
good
had
old
more to do
modern
with
stuff.
conquering a culture because the Romans
Yeah,
conquered the Greeks, imported the Greeks into their culture so that they could learn more because they were such. I would say that the Romans were far more industrial because they couldn't think. They were not as creative as the Greeks were. Look at how much they mimicked the Greek culture. They just changed the names.
just change the name. You might be
Yeah.
right. The original, like,
They just changed the names of the gods. They changed the names of several things, but they really appreciated their ideas for music and art and literature, poetry.
Yeah.
because they were more of a warmongering country. The Romans were. Look at them. They went
Yeah.
out and they conquered. But remember that Rome was also
Right.
conquered by the Greeks, and they fought back and forth. They conquered each other back and forth. But they were also conquering northern Africa and those regions. And so they had those people as slaves. They went further down in. The Ethiopians were thought to be, in Greek mythology and later Roman, they were the land of the blessed.
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia was the land of the blessed. I mean, they really loved that region of Africa. But as we get further in, there is not a culture that you will find, there is not a race that you will find that has not been used as a slave
Mm.
around the world.
Oh, geez, that's episode way down the line. I couldn't even begin to argue that. It's like, well,
So,
let me think of that. No,
well,
let me
no,
not think about that.
it had to
This is
do,
a huge question, but yeah.
no,
I mean,
because
if
if
you
you
think
think
about
about
today,
it,
the economic slavery, I think,
I,
because critical or
isn't all
sociology is,
slavery economic, though?
well, yeah, but I'm talking about, yeah, I'm talking about industrial. That's why I made that industrial on a scale that's international kind of thing. You know, kingdom to kingdom was sort of more of a, they were more of a lower formed societal base. But as we kind of came around and started, certainly as we sailed ships, started trade with distant lands and open up commerce, certainly in the age of capitalism and early mercantilism,
Oh, this was long
seeing people
before
as seeing people as as livestock, seeing
chattel.
people as money. Yeah, just pure money. I mean, I got a boat full of these people, and if I lose only 8 of them, then I'll make out as a profit. When you're talking about human lives, that's sort of on a larger scale, especially since you really caused the diaspora of a huge amount of people from
But you
Africa.
still have the same thing with human trafficking, don't you?
No, 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 not at all. This
But
is
not on the
but on the
same mass
grandest
scale.
scale. This was an earth shaking scale. Well,
But
and
wait, wait,
especially in
wait.
the
Before you
United
go
States.
further, you have to remember that the slave trade was already in operation
Yeah.
in the Indian Ocean like 200 to 300 years prior to
Well, this
the
isn't the
Europeans coming in.
then you can't compare them. They're apples to oranges. It's when you're talking about the triangle trade and just
Right.
the settlement of the northern or the western, North and South America, the western frontiers are there, and just how many people were just pulled from Africa. We didn't even have
Right.
that many here. There's like so many went to Brazil. So there's such an injection
Well,
of
in South
agriculture
America,
in Brazil.
there are towns that are known as slave towns still.
I'm certainly
And you
sure
can
that,
go there and they're predominantly black and they're
yeah,
very poor. But
yeah,
maybe
and that
things are changing down there because a lot of Americans are moving down because it's so much cheaper to retire down there. So,
it might. Yeah, I don't know. We had the most severe form of slavery here. Hence, we had segregated society. Hence, we have a very black and white culture. However, I would say we don't. It's really coming together quite quickly for me. I can
mhm.
see, and it's like I think the accent on black and white culture, or the intermix of them too, are just amazingly great. I mean, if you look at American art, American
Mhm.
culture, American music, and how it all came together, it's unbelievable
Oh,
what we've
it's
created from this cultural mix. Because it was very segregated. It went, like maybe
mhm.
Jesus, 1920, 100 and 1880s, 1890s, an old guy sitting on a porch, an old black man with not so much teeth, maybe pushing about 64, but mastered this old guitar and made it sound like no one's heard it sound. And then that got passed on. And then now you've got us from those people and people that were creating instruments in Appalachia, and just playing them. And that became bluegrass. And then country came up in the 20th
Mhm.
century. And it's all Nas does his thing in country. I mean,
Right.
it's just, yeah.
And you
I
have
mean, quite a
jazz.
culture. And then, well, jazz is just its own beautiful language that was created right here in America.
Now, okay. So,
Uh,
let's wind back a little bit.
We actually
because
kind
there.
of made a point, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so critical race theory
Yeah.
is based on conflict theory,
From one
which
of the aspects
came
of
out of
sociology.
critical legal studies,
Yeah.
which
Hmm.
were a
Critical,
series of.
yeah, conflict theory didn't come from critical legal studies. It's just
Okay,
part of
it,
sociology.
was that something that, where did that come from? Just
Oh,
from
yeah.
sociology?
Yeah. There's
That's a
three aspects of
sociological concept.
sociological study, and one of them would be conflict theory. The
Okay,
sociological conflict, and how it works in societies and things. And so
okay,
they
because
were
it.
looking at it because there's definitely a conflict. Excuse me.
Okay, so then we had Richard Delgado, Derek Bell, and Kimberly Crenshaw
They started writing a
and
series of
others
essays.
create the tenets of critical race theory.
Mm-hmm. So
What
there's
are those
series.
tenets? Do you know what those tenets are? Can you list those
Excuse me.
tenets?
Well, yeah, it's what we spoke about. It's that that race exists and in a
Okay, race
society,
exists,
and that it's actually it serves a purpose,
serves a purpose.
and that it's a construct of the society itself.
Okay, here's where I have a problem with construct of society. So when we say that something is a social construct,
Mm-hmm.
I can go and I can type in what is a social construct, and I can get an answer, but it gives me a convenient answer.
Yeah.
But so race is a social construct. They're also saying that sex or gender is a social construct as well. But if that's a social construct, then that started
Yeah, but that's
eons
not.
ago. Where the
Yeah.
race, where
Trying to
race,
think of the
well,
wording here.
I mean, if you're going to use that term, it's got to have something that's going to cover bases, correct?
Well, what it does
You
is
can't
it
just have
uses
it
this.
conveniently
It
twist
creates
for one
race
thing
so
or
it can
another.
invent, manipulate, or basically retire when convenient social constructs. That race is actually manipulated by our society. It isn't just some sort of aspect that behaves
Okay,
on its own. We manipulate race
give me
as
an
a
example.
society. Great. Let's look at stereotype. The guy who was jogging through the neighborhood, who was followed by the guys, three good old boys who accosted him, tried to
Right, and
citizen
killed him.
arrest him, and then killed him.
Right.
That is
Okay.
due to the fact that he was. They can say all they want about we just saw him as a bad guy, not a black guy, but he was a black guy.
So where
Trayvon
does
Martin was a black guy with a hoodie. He
right.
was turned out when the hoodie came off, he was a 17-year-old skinny kid. I've met dozens of them. It hurts my heart to think about. But he was a black guy first, and that's a social construct. So
Okay.
you're
Now,
looking for it.
where
Therefore,
did that social construct then come, as you said earlier,
yeah,
from the propensity for people to look at the slaves as being less than,
or
being
dangerous.
being lower, but then when they hit society, when they moved up north, when they moved up to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Chicago,
Yeah.
New York, to all the Akron, Ohio, when they moved up
Mm-hmm.
to get out of the South for the jobs that were industrial because they could have a better life,
Mm-hmm.
is that when the dangers started happening? When you had all the white people clutching their pearls, saying, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, what are
Well,
they doing here? These
yeah.
people look different than me. They speak differently. They live differently."
There's two parts to that question. First,
Okay.
the overall power of any given society wants to create an enemy and an outsider within the society to focus on. It's
Okay.
great for political. It's great for your politics.
You
So
always have to have the boogeyman.
yeah, and the boogeyman is first the black man. He was dehumanized to be made a slave after the Civil War.
Got it.
Now I have to accept this person who's not a human as a real human. So you can make the black person quite a boogeyman quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you do is you persuade the lower classes that as low as they are, as much as in the filth as they are, there's always somebody lower than they are, and that's the end bomb. And that's where it comes from. So I may be some poor dirt farmer from backwoods Arkansas, but I know I'm better than a n. And they know that. It's
Mm-hmm.
part of their identity without any merit whatsoever. If you are a congressman, one of the congressmen went down during the Emmett Till trial, and they were just confounded. They go, well, we can't let him in here. He's got to go over in the galleries. He's got to go upstairs. He goes, no. This congressman says, this is a congressman, and he wants to see.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, no, let me get this. This N guy is a congressman, and they're just looking. And I saw the interview, and they're just like, what? And he wants to watch, and they're just confounded. It just didn't cross their minds that a black person could be a congressman.
Well, that brings me to the next question.
Yeah.
Because it would be an anomaly then for Frederick Douglass to have reached his.
No, that's the identity that's allowed to be praised and put forth as the example that black people are not put down, and there's not a conflict. It's their own impetus and it's their own motivation that keeps them back, and it's not true. I know a black person's a millionaire, and I know 100 of them that are white. So what's going on? Yeah, I know this and that, but I know dozens, scores more that are examples of white, or the overlying culture, at least in America. And so that doesn't hold water.
Okay, so because next week we're going to talk about the New York Magazine article that I think highlights a lot of the cringe that we see around CRT and a lot of the misinformation, and creates this huge polemic that makes it really difficult for people to understand because one reason or another. And so I would suggest that people tune into that one as well.
I keep thinking about conflict, and if you don't like conflict, this is based in conflict. Right. So, I mean, the whole premise of it is kind of in your face here, and it was academically in your face here.
Okay, so why are people so adamant in thinking that critical race theory is just wrong? And I believe that you have these, I'm just going to say that these social do-gooders who don't know what the heck they're doing or what they're talking about. And they're saying that they are teaching critical race theory, and they have no clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, like in the schools.
So, but you have parents who are getting upset because they say that it's being taught. And how honest an argument is that actually? I mean, is that parents who are acting out of pure, what's the word that you use because they've read something inflammatory and that gets them going? Because like I've said, the media loves to gin up the public. And
exactly.
And they do it so well. And it doesn't matter what you're watching or what you're reading.
If you don't have,
and if you don't have, don't have other sources, because that's why independent media is so vastly important today, because it's not the corporations telling you what you're supposed to believe.
Unfortunately, well, some of them are. Well, they actually kind of are, aren't they?
But so is it all a lie that schools are teaching CRT, critical race theory?
Well, let's go to the audience. Let's ask the teachers around.
Right.
God, that's a great question. I actually spoke to a few people what they knew about CRT, and they knew the premises of the conflicts. And they said the more well-informed of them said that they understood that saw how racism was inherent in our society. But I couldn't flesh it out from them, kind of if they understood what that meant.
So they understand, they see the cover of it.
Yes.
But the context and the meat of it is where they're lacking.
Yeah. For example, I asked specifically, are you aware of the conflict theory aspects in sociology? And they just blanked out. Like, I don't know anything much about sociology. And I said, okay, because that's exactly where it came from. And I actually studied sociology, strangely enough, at the time. So this was all falling into line for me.
Well, the whole thing is
Oh, yeah.
everything that you've talked about this evening is based on sociology and sociological
Yeah.
principles.
Yeah. I mean, it was supposed to be scientific sociology in its infancy. I can't remember.
Yeah, but it's a soft science.
I mean, it's very soft science. I thought it was fascinating because
It
I
is.
kind of wondered, why do societies do that stuff? Could be in the story, and you have that huge question: why do they all go nuts? Especially
Well,
about
what
after Nazi
happens?
Germany, it's like everyone always wants to know how did Germany do that?
Well,
That's horrifying.
one of my associates when I was much younger,
Mm-hmm.
working up in Alaska, one of my associates was a former Nazi youth.
Oh,
And and we spoke.
yeah,
And
I
I
would.
said, what was it like being a Nazi youth? And he said, you know, to be honest, at that time, everything was in such a confused perception to everybody because they had lost the First World War. The Deutschmark was worth nothing. The inflation was out of control. People were starving. They were doing the best that they could. And along comes this guy who says, I will take you out of there. And they wanted to believe him.
And he
And
did.
it's no different than any other politician who comes up and says, how good is your life now? Is your life any better than it was 4 years ago?
That's a good point.
And
I think that
and
too.
then they talk about, and then they move into power. And of course, you had Hitler and the brown shirts and whatever. But
There's actually though.
then they
I
start.
try. Yeah, go ahead. Well, you try
Then they,
not to defend or to compare everyone to Hitler, though. That becomes a thing. It's got a name. I can't
yeah, you
recall.
can't
What that's
compare
like
people
Hitler.
to
That's
Hitler.
not like Hitler. Hitler was Hitler. This is like Jack. No, it's
I
not.
mean, if you start comparing people today to Hitler,
It's
then
like
you don't know what you're even standing on.
I
You're in
know
quicksand.
it's this thing, and it's like, would you quit going to like, oh, that's like Hitler? No, go stop
That's the
that.
problem with the media because that's what they do.
A lot
And
of
you go
people
to
think
the
that's actually
worst
nice.
possible. I mean, you might as well just say, my mother was Pol Pot. But anyway,
Right, exactly. Who's Pol Pot? Oh no.
and it's not a dish.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, it's not.
but anyway, so here they were, and this guy starts leading them. And much like you have this
Yeah.
near religious fervor today on so many different issues where people are chanting and they're demanding things, and it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, people are going crazy. They're justifying everything that they're doing. They want to control, they want to dominate. The arguments are all about domination, control,
Yeah.
and who's going to be the overpowering force.
There's
And
no one's
then they
seeking solutions,
right.
only
And
conflict.
except they were getting the solutions because they were looking for the boogeyman. And who was the boogeyman? It was the Jews. So, but then they started bringing in the war machine, and everybody knows that war means money. We're talking about, because I like the boogeyman thing. Do we still have that boogeyman today?
Well, ultimately, I think the boogeyman is the failure to face reality. It's just that it's conflict theory. It points out a rather unpleasant history, and some people can't like be objective about that.
Right.
They can't. Truth and reconciliation. Nelson Mandela did when he took power. He said, "Okay, the truth comes out, and then we reconcile. But everything comes out. We have to face this. We can't keep it buried." And I highly suspect, and I'll probably scour his writings now and find out he got that from watching us just never face our race, our racial identity. This we're still wanting to hold on to this black versus white versus everyone. It's my country, not yours. And it's like, yeah, that's just not going to work. We have to
Is
face
that
it.
based more on fear?
Absolutely based on fear. It's fed on fear. It's fed with fear. It starts with a little bit of fear, and then you get some news outlets or some podcasts that really feed that. And then you can
Mm-hmm.
that can becomes an inferno. It becomes your identity, i.e., January 6th. you're willing to do something, and then later you kind of realize what you did is you go to jail and go, wow, was I duped? I just went a little overboard on that. Yes, you did. Because fear, you let fear take you, which is the ultimate enemy.
But that's on both sides.
Oh, it's on the human side. It's in everyone's brain. We just, as
Yeah.
humans, don't do well with facing the truth and facing our fears, like to see them what they really are, and they're not. Studied propaganda and how messages, and how people can be like, well, racism, how it works, and how your history can be changed. One is you just write about your history, or you focus it ethnocentrically. Two, you omit history. Or three, you modify it, you change it. And so if you look back at examples of how things have happened, at least in my lifetime, I'm thinking, well, I'll be darned. I've seen all that, all this information about minority history just come flooding forward in the last like 30 years, when it was just really difficult to find. Kind of in, like, say 70 years ago, it was like not even collected. I mean, an article here, an article there, and the downplaying of the history, the downplaying of the event itself. Sometimes just the utter destruction. That's the fourth, is just the destruction of evidence, just the erasure of history.
So you have these basic tenets. To what end?
Well, it's just a way of looking at it. The truth.
If you're looking at it, then why is
truth is it's real?
Because I don't understand the conflict. If or are they saying that this is what we need to contend with? This is something we need to do something about.
Yeah.
But that would mean that there's an end game to it. Is there an end game to this?
Yes, I would say my end game is the same as theirs. Social justice.
Who's the they? Theirs.
Oh,
who?
Bell and the cohorts of
okay, the authors.
CRT, the authors of CRT, just when they're exploring it, they just want to, I just reveal the truth. That's why I always wanted to just teach African American history. Is just go, look, I found this is really interesting. There's a whole nother bunch of history that was just not there, and now it is, and let's integrate it into what we have and give us more of an American picture. And so theirs was legal, of course. Started out legal, and then it expanded into the study of it. And it's very pertinent, and it's very supported, and it's very real. We do that.
So what do we want? What would you like people to take away from this show?
That they've just been introduced to a topic that most college students aren't introduced to unless they specify their study. And if you are in like a Black Studies or history program, something like that, you're probably going to encounter CRT on a more advanced level in a master's program or a doctoral program, because it's very advanced. It's sort of, there's more to it, and really picking apart the essays and thinking about it takes time. But, there's some four kind of basic tenets about it, and they're pretty true. It's a part of our society. We can see it. It becomes, and it's not just us. It says a society will do this.
Okay, so let me ask you one more question. How embroiled in Marxist theory is CRT?
Marxist political theory, absolutely zero. There's absolutely no references to communism or Marxism in any way. But what Marx studied was conflict, and his origins of his philosophy were in conflict theory. And he produced a lot of essays and a lot of works and a lot of thoughts on conflict and conflict in society. He didn't just say, hey, I'm going to be Karl Marx, grow a beard, write this thing and make people hate me. He had a long career as an academic, and conflict was what he looked at specifically. And so he's given credit for that. Sociology tips its hat to his origins. Yeah.
And I think what people also need to realize is that the Chinese and the Russians, even though they seem to be forming an alliance right now, they were at such huge political loggerheads for such a long time because neither of them believed that the other guy, the other side, was actually following Marxist tenets of communism. So that they both declared that the other had bastardized the entire idea. So,
Shia and
but
Sunni Muslims.
hmm?
Shia and Sunni Muslims.
There you go with some
There's the
more. I mean,
holy cow! It's like
you have
really.
the Protestants against the
Oh,
Protestants, and the Catholics, and the Protestants against the Catholics. I mean, yeah,
well, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's not an uncommon thing. Yeah,
you
you're not
know.
doing it right. Now we hate you worse than we hate even the other enemies.
Hmm.
It's funny that way. Humans, we think weird. I've been trying to figure it out. There's lots of theories. We just go like sometimes we don't think, I guess is what it is. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, bingo. And it was made and they do it on a large scale. It's like
Hmm.
people, I mean, I can
People usually do double down when they're taken to task.
exactly my point. Why? We should
Even though it serves no purpose for them, and even
our
though it means that they're about to drown,
yeah.
they will allow themselves to drown rather than say, oh, wait a second,
Yep.
you're
Bury,
right.
bury themselves alive to show they can handle the shovel. It's
Yeah,
like, oh
there's
my
something
God.
about pride, isn't there?
Yeah, I didn't really realize how powerful it was. I
Hmm.
thought stupidity was the most powerful force in the universe, but no. I'm kidding. I don't.
Okay, so with that, I am going to say we're going to sign off, and please, please, please do let recommend us, share us, subscribe. Also, remember we're on YouTube and
Yeah.
we're on all the podcast platforms. We're there for you, and you'll have to come back next week when we discuss this. What's misinformation?
Yeah, we'll talk about why this
So,
freaks people out.
right. So,
Deconstruct
there
that a
we go.
touch.
Okay. So, that being said, adios. Take good care of yourself, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Aloha.